Now usually when we've had enough to drink, we just stop drinking, or we pass out. Well, our guy had definitely had enough and passed out mid-alcohol enema. However,
What it is, guys? It's your boy BlastphamousHD, and today we are here to remind you once again of what not to do out there in the streets by watching a compilation of stories talking about how some people left the planet in some of the foolish ways possible. Dumb ways to die. Let's do this.
Despite all the advancements of modern society, people still find ways to fall through the safety nets and put themselves in danger. Some people are so dumb, no amount of health and safety regulations can keep them around past their self-inflicted expiry date. So without further ado, let's marvel at some of the unfortunate souls who've selected themselves out of the gene pool, winning a posthumous Darwin Award in the process. Dumpster Drank. Of all the places you should never gather a nice refreshing drink from, a landfill site is pretty high on the list. Or at least it should be. But for one couple from Belarus, a landfill seemed just as good as a convenience store for acquiring drinks back in October 2020. While scouring the local dump, as you do, a man found this bottle, filled with a mysterious murky liquid, and took the bottle home to share its contents with his wife. It seemed the pair assumed it contained some perfectly safe-to-drink homemade hooch, and like a nice bottle of wine after a hard day's work, popped it open to share. Unsurprisingly, the next day, the couple became extremely ill, and while emergency services were called, it proved too late. The concoction in the bottle, it turned out, had indeed been homemade alcohol, but its owner had seemingly disposed of it after realizing it wasn't very good at all. In fact, it was completely poisonous. As a result, the couple kicked the bucket together, after what might be considered the worst romantic dinner of all time. Pretty dumb, right? Well, I'll tell you what most certainly isn't dumb, doing yourself the favor of liking this video and subscribing to be amazed. On the fence. Some people will go to great lengths to protect their personal possessions, but one Brazilian man's desperation to keep his car safe from thieves back in 2010 proved to be his downfall. As robberies were becoming increasingly frequent in his local area, the fellow decided to keep his car protected by building a miniature electric fence around it. Only this wasn't any old touch it and get a slightly uncomfortable warning shock kind of fence. This one was amped up and designed to hurt a lot. For a while, it seemed to work well, seeing as nobody stole the car. But things soon came to a shocking conclusion. When, on one occasion, he forgot he'd left the electric fence turned on when he attempted to move it aside to get into his car. He was electrocuted, and he'd built his contraption with such a high current that it killed him. Talk about being your own worst enemy.
Yo, boy.
A refreshing swim.
Oh boy.
How far would you go to save your phone?
Not
Would you
far
be
at all.
crazy enough to dive into an icy, partially frozen river to retrieve it? Well, one man
Absolutely
from
not.
Detroit did exactly that in
No.
February 2020. While
what?
fishing through a large hole he cut out of
2020?
the ice, the fellow accidentally dropped his phone into the water. Clearly lacking in any notion of self-preservation, he dove straight into the hole after it. Unfortunately, he failed to realize that sudden submersion in ice-cold water can be pretty bad for the human body. It can send you into shock, can instantly paralyze your muscles if you haven't received training beforehand, and can even cause a heart attack due to intense constriction of your blood vessels. Whether one of these physiological problems took hold or whether he simply became disoriented under the ice remains unclear. All we know for sure is that he didn't re-emerge until several hours later, when emergency responders pulled his lifeless body from the water. We can only assume he must have had a glorious collection of cute animal pics on his phone to make jumping into icy doom seem worth it.
Yep. Probably got his phone too.
Lesson not learned. As the COVID-19 pandemic came into full swing in 2020, it brought a lot of Darwin Award contenders out of the woodwork. One example occurred at a Serbian Orthodox church in November 2020, following the death of a high-ranking bishop. The bishop's death had been caused by coronavirus, yet the funeral held at the church showed no regard at all for the types of conditions that led to such an infection. The funeral was essentially a checklist of everything you shouldn't do if you want to avoid the disease. There was large crowds in an enclosed space, countless people being fed Holy Communion from the same unwashed spoon, and of course, countless people kissing the hand of the recently deceased, who, I must reiterate, died of coronavirus. On top of that, there were only a handful of people wearing masks. In a twist you probably saw coming, almost immediately after the funeral, the church patriarch who'd organized and led the event also became seriously ill with COVID-19. He too died, having willingly failed to respect the advice of scientists on one of the most serious health disasters of the past 100 years. I just hope his funeral was a little more restrained.
Just a little bit more restrained.
Clotheslined. There are many dangers facing motorcyclists on the road, but one of the greatest of all is a rider's own recklessness.
What movie is that?
This was proven one morning in 2008, when one motorcyclist took the ride of a lifetime near Manasota Key in Florida. Witnesses reported seeing the risky rider, wearing nothing but swim trunks and sneakers, speeding towards the Manasota Key drawbridge, which was in the process of being raised up. He ignored the flashing red lights warning drivers to stay away from the bridge and instead attempted to accelerate, hoping to jump the ever-growing gap. Newsflash, he didn't make it. He'd failed to spot the safety gate arms, which had already descended. He crashed head first straight into one of the gates and was instantly swept from his bike and onto the asphalt, while the bike itself continued up the ramp across the gap to the other side. While the rider failed to survive the ordeal, at least one of them made it across.
That's what's up. Need to go.
Proving a point. On May 19, 1885, a man named Robert Emmett Odlum set out to be the first man to jump into New York City's East River from the Brooklyn Bridge. His reasons for this strange aspiration were surprisingly well-meaning for the most part. First and foremost, he sought to prove that, against the commonly held beliefs of the time, people did not die by simply falling through the air. He hoped this demonstration would encourage people to be willing to jump from burning buildings into a safety net in the incident of a fire, as people were too distrusting of this idea at the time. He also hoped to achieve some fame in proving it was safe. But unfortunately, any hopes he'd had of reassuring people about the safety of leaping from great heights were soon dashed when it came time to jump. As Odlum leapt from the bridge's roadway 130 feet up, he attempted to stay straight in the air, but a strong wind blew him into a diagonal angle of descent. This meant when he eventually struck the water, the angle of impact caused some serious damage. Slapping the water at approximately 62 miles per hour, it exerted enough force to rupture his spleen, liver, and kidneys, and break several of his ribs. The official cause of death, however, was declared to be concussion. On the bright side, people now know that rapidly falling doesn't kill you as much as the landing. In the words of British TV legend Jeremy Clarkson, speed has never killed anyone. Suddenly becoming stationary, that's what gets you. Hazard prevention. Sometimes you really have to wonder about people's sense of logic. Case in point, two guys who suddenly landed on the sense of hazard awareness after doing something incredibly dangerous and stupid back in 2002. In a farm field in Pennsylvania, two friends were practicing their marksmanship by shooting, not at bottles or cans, but the electrical insulators holding power lines aloft overhead.
Really?
After shooting 6 of the insulators off of 2 utility poles, a live high-voltage wire fell to the ground, risking setting the entire surrounding field ablaze. Suddenly seized by an uncharacteristic sense of health and safety, one of the men rushed over to the wire and attempted to pick it up to move it to prevent danger.
What?
The instant he seized it in his hand, the powerful current passed through him and he was fatally electrocuted. The lesson? If you're going to suddenly grow a conscience, maybe try doing it before you do something lethally stupid.
I'll give him that.
Safety first.
Got that one.
The saying, "practice what you preach," has never been more ironically fitting than in the case of one man who met his untimely demise in Australia in 2017. While filming a forklift safety video, the owner of a safety training school was thrown from the forklift he was driving and fatally crushed by his payload. An investigation revealed that despite what the intentions of the video had been, the man had broken several crucial rules to forklift safety. He was driving over rough, uneven terrain at high speed, all while not wearing a seatbelt. Alongside an unhealthy sprinkling of driver error, it proved that sometimes you really should listen to your own advice. Don't go chasing waterfalls. As most rational people can easily conclude, safety advice displayed at dangerous locations tend to be there for a reason. Not so bright people, however, often seem to have problems grasping this idea. This was proven by one woman on a pleasure trip to a natural waterfall at a tourist hotspot in Cauca, Colombia in January 2020. While searching for the perfect selfie angle, the woman ignored safety warnings about wandering too close to the edge of the waterfall. Paying more attention to her phone than where she was headed, she ended up plummeting over the waterfall's edge, straight down into the boulder and rock-filled pool below. The hard landing caused enough damage to her skull to set her expiry date to right there, right then. How many misguided lives will be lost before people finally learn selfies are never worth dying over? Vending fatality. At some point, you may have heard you shouldn't shake a vending machine because it might fall on you, but nobody ever believes that's ever actually happened, right? Well, as it turns out, it actually did happen back in 1984 in Safety Harbor, Florida. As a newspaper article from the time recounts, a man had been attempting to get a can of soda from the vending machine in his apartment complex's recreation center. Whether he paid his cash and the machine failed to dispense his goods, or whether he just decided to shake it to try and get a free drink, remains unclear to this day. All that's known for sure is that an hour later, the thirsty fella was found utterly crushed with the vending machine on top of him. Yeesh. Going by this tale, if you want to stay safe, Safety Harbor is not the place to go, especially if you're thirsty.
Okay, so did he get his soda though?
Troublesome transport.
Did he get his soda?
In 2020, a poorly chosen seating arrangement on a bus resulted in the unexpected demise of several people in Manitou, India. While being transported to a wedding venue on a very overcrowded bus, several of the guests climbed up onto the rooftop for the ride. This was, of course, already a very risky idea, from the risk of falling off alone. But it wasn't a fall that proved to be these rooftop riders' ruin. Their downfall came, instead, in the form of some high-tension, relatively low-hanging electrical wires. At their lofty perch, the riders were at head level with the wires, and before they had the chance to react, 3 of them struck the exposed wire directly and were electrocuted. One was killed instantly. Another succumbed to his injuries later, while the third survived, albeit thoroughly fried. Next time, I've got a feeling he'll just wait for the next bus to come instead.
That's real.
Watching the skies. If an opportunity presented itself for you to communicate with extraterrestrials, would you take it?
No.
And if so, how far would you go to make sure you didn't let the chance pass you by?
Oh,
Well, one woman put the chance to commune with little green men above her own safety back in 1982. Believing she'd been contacted by some type of intergalactic power, she convinced a willing companion to accompany her in carrying out the instructions of her alien contacts. She claimed they'd commanded her to drive out to an isolated location in the northeastern Minnesota wilderness and await further instruction. Assuming this would be a hugely significant moment in the interstellar advancement of humankind, the pair did exactly that. Despite the extremely snowy winter weather. Once parked up in the designated location, they dutifully awaited the arrival of their extraterrestrial acquaintances. And they waited, and waited, and waited. Unfortunately, their food supplies ran out after a week, and they lost access to water when the nearby lake froze over. Still, they refused to leave their post on the off chance that the aliens appeared while they were gone. Putting total faith in the idea that the aliens would appear before anything bad happened to either of them, they stayed in the freezing cold with nothing to eat or drink. Eventually, frozen, starving, and fatally dehydrated, the woman died. Shortly after, the man accompanying her, in his much weakened state and with the car having been rendered unusable by the icy conditions, crawled through a quarter mile of snow to save himself. He survived, but his alien contacting partner did not, and their little green guests never showed up. I guess the aliens must have got the wrong address.
Hope you got the butt cheeks.
Best seats in the house.
At least get the butt
For
cheeks.
as long as there have been sports events requiring tickets, there have also been people trying to find ways to watch for free. This unfortunate tendency to save a bit of cash proved to be the quite literal downfall of a
Never
number
risk
of
your
football
life for
fans in
female
San
genitalia,
Francisco
man.
back in 1900. To avoid the
Not
ticket
worth it.
fees, between 400 and 500 supporters clambered onto the roof of a glass factory so they could view a game taking place at San Francisco's nearby Old Recreation Park Stadium. But in a twist of fate that somehow occurred to none of them as a possibility, the factory roof proved incapable of supporting all that weight. 20 minutes after kickoff, not only did the roof collapse, but it also sent the revelers falling directly onto the blazing hot brick cover of a furnace vat filled with molten glass.
That's
To
not
paint a picture of how hot this furnace was, several of the men who fell onto the cover instantly caught a blaze. 22 of the participants in this ill-thought-out plan were sent shuffling off this mortal coil from the incident, while 100 more suffered serious injuries. While people today may still not have learned their lesson to always pay for tickets, they seem to have learned not to pile en masse onto factory roofs in the years since.
Good Lord.
Deadliest Catch. Being a magician can be a dangerous job at times, particularly if you specialize in risky-looking illusions. While many classic nail-biting tricks are often much safer than they seem, some of them are genuinely hazardous if not followed correctly, like catching a bullet tricks. Now, obviously, tricks of this category, under normal circumstances, are never actually supposed to involve real bullets being fired by a magician's assistant. But in 1889, an early performer of this trick had a serious mishap on stage. Magician and cabinet maker Michael Hattal took to the stage, promising his audience he could catch a speeding bullet using nothing more than the American flag wrapped around his body. He called an assistant up to the stage and asked him to pick 2 pieces of ammunition from an ammo box for Hattal to load into a rifle. At this point, Hattal would usually switch out the rounds for blanks, but on this occasion, he accidentally swapped the real ammo for more ammo. The volunteer took aim and fired, delivering a fatal blow to the unfortunate performer. Luckily, Hattal survived just long enough to take responsibility for the blunder, clearing the volunteer's name on his deathbed. On the bright side, he certainly gave the audience a performance they'd remember.
That's real.
Man vs. Cactus. Staying on the topic of firearm mishaps now, we have the story of one man who lost a shootout against a stationary target. In 1982, a couple of petty criminals headed out into Arizona's Sonoran Desert for a decidedly dumb purpose, shooting at cacti. Their targets of choice were the local saguaro cacti, which can grow well over 40 feet tall, a fact which should have probably raised some alarm bells. But it didn't, and the tremendous size and weight of each cactus only made them more appealing targets. The first cactus was shot down without incident, thanks to the powerful blast of a 16-gauge shotgun. But the second target was larger, at almost 30 feet tall. One of the cactus vandals moved into point-blank range to deliver the kill shot, pulled the trigger, and brought huge chunks of the 2-ton spiky behemoth raining down upon himself. He was killed almost instantly by the weight of the spiky chunks that landed on him, while his buddy lived to share the tale. I suppose the moral of the story is, don't bring a gun to a cactus fight.
Don't shoot cactus in general.
Something to lean on. In August 2020, an attempt to pose for a picture in an unusual spot ended very badly, showing just why you should be careful what you lean on. The photo opportunity in question occurred for one man at a large statue of a cross in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The man climbed up the central concrete column of the cross and onto one of the arms, where he posed for a picture giving a thumbs up. However, he overestimated the strength of the upper beam, which he leant against while the picture was being taken. As he leant on it, the beam came loose and toppled right over, sending it and the man falling straight down to the ground. A particularly nasty landing waited for him at the bottom, and to make matters worse, the heavy beam landed right on top of him, with the man's religious photo opportunity ultimately proving fatal. If there is a god, it looks like he doesn't appreciate selfies. Alligator Affection. Sometimes, the universe seems to have a funny tendency of punishing people who put too much faith in their own good luck, particularly those who willingly put themselves in unbelievably dangerous situations, like one woman who put too much faith in her ability to not get eaten by hungry wild animals in Kiowa Island, South Carolina in May 2020. While in a drunken state, the woman decided to get waist-deep in a local pond, which she knew was home to an alligator. This was despite the friend who watched from horror at the shore warning her the gator had been observed chowing down on a live deer a few days earlier. Instead of taking that as a sign of the gator's killing power, the woman instead retorted, "I don't look like a deer," and waded over to pet the reptile. The gator, of course, wasn't too keen on this idea, and grabbed her with its powerful jaws. Miraculously, the woman managed to break free and began wading back to the shore, telling her friend, "I guess I won't do that again." And she was technically right, because she wouldn't have the chance. Why? Because the gator grabbed her again while she was retreating and dragged her below the water to her demise. Unfortunately, one very important realization came all too late to this woman. You don't mess with alligators.
Tinder date survived.
A dangerous mix. In the world of lethal combinations, there are few dangerous pairings more obvious than water and electricity. But some people totally failed to grasp that fact. Like one man in New York who grew impatient after a storm damaged some power lines along his street, leaving him without electricity. Somehow, he'd landed on the idea that he'd be able to fix the problem easily if he could just remove the downed wires and replace them himself. Assuming he knew better than the emergency workers guarding the downed wires to keep the public safe, the man repeatedly attempted to gain access to them. But after being shooed away several times, he decided to wait until the cover of darkness, at which point he returned to the site. With plastic bags on his feet for what he must have assumed was total protection from any electric threats, he began his idea of a fix. Attempting to fast-track the repairs, he tried to cut off part of the downed wire with an industrial power saw, while absent-mindedly standing on the wet, puddle-covered floor left by the storm. As his saw reached the metal core of the wire, which he'd failed to realize was still live, his body and the wet puddle his feet were in provided the perfect circuit to the ground. He was electrocuted with a full force of 4,800 volts. Needless to say, while his determination to help was commendable, a human body just wasn't made to endure that kind of a shock. In a moment of lethal stupidity, the DIY moment proved fatal, well and truly earning this man a Darwin Award.
Juicy Jenga. Back in April 2022, a thirsty thief in the city of Catalica, Italy, ended up in a situation that was more than he could swallow. On the Easter Monday, he decided to break into a clearly closed grocery store and grab himself a drink. But instead of pulling a bottle from one of the shelves, he chose to grab a bottle from a huge tower of crates that had been stacked up by the staff. And not just any bottle, one from a crate right in the middle. Anyone who's ever played Jenga knows this is a rookie error. And as you probably guessed, the entire stack collapsed, crushing him beneath all that water weight. He wasn't found until the next day when store staff had to go back through the CCTV footage to figure out what caused all this chaos. Well, one thing's for sure, he did a great job of winning this Darwin Award.
Oh boy. Death by water.
Clown School.
Death by juice.
Can you juggle? No matter how many times I've tried, I always end up with more balls on the floor than there are in the air. Now, I've seen juggling masters that can yeet swords, fire sticks, even chainsaws up into the air with confidence. Worst comes to worst, they can only really risk hurting themselves. Me? I'll use little beanbags, balls, maybe even eggs if I'm feeling extra spicy. But you know what smart people, and even experts, won't touch? Grenades. I mean, juggling grenades, that's the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard. No one would be dumb enough to do that, right? Right?
No.
Let's rewind to 2001 and head over to Vidovic, Croatia, where a bunch of college students were having a big old party. One of them decided to try and impress his friends by juggling a few items, one of which was, you guessed it, a hand grenade. I'm honestly struggling to follow the logic here, but having pulled the pin, he proceeded to juggle with the live explosive. Now, grenades work via a chemical reaction, giving the thrower a few precious seconds to get out of range before it explodes. This guy, for whatever reason, didn't think this applied to him, and the grenade exploded as he was juggling it. The blast injured 6 equally dumb onlookers, but our Darwin Award winner was removed from the gene pool completely. Well, he might have been acting like a clown, but this guy ended up proving he was the entire circus. Car wash cretin. Chances are you've been through an automated car wash before, right? Okay, what's the first rule of using an automated car wash? No, it isn't record a TikTok. It's don't get out of the car. No, seriously, machinery in some of these places is incredibly powerful and can cause serious injuries or worse. Back in April 2022 in San Diego, a man drove into an automated car wash and then, without starting up the cycle, tried to get out of his vehicle while his car was still in gear. Apparently dragged by the vehicle, he ended up fatally pinned in between the left side of his car and the car wash machinery. But here's the thing. No one can explain why he decided to get out of the car. Was there a bee in there with him? Did he think the automated part of the wash meant he didn't need to be in his vehicle? Whatever it was, his car came out the other side of the washer, much messier than before. Pretty fly for a dead guy. Back in November 2021, a student pilot from Houston, Texas was allowed by his instructor to fly solo in a Cessna 172 light aircraft for the first time ever. Absolutely exhilarated by the experience, he went out and bought himself a brand new plane, a Piper PA-28140, despite not having a full license yet. His instructor clearly told him that he still needed more tutorage before he'd be able to fly solo regularly, and even more so before he could fly his new plane. However, our student wasn't one for rules. It turns out there are quite a few things student pilots can't do. These include fly with a passenger in the aircraft, fly at night, without endorsement from the instructor, fly when it's foggy with limited visibility, and fly a different model of aircraft than what's on their license unless specifically endorsed by their instructor. Can you guess how many of these rules the student broke?
All of them.
If you guessed all of them, go get yourself a cookie. Yep, one very foggy evening, he decided to take a friend of his up in his brand new aircraft without telling his instructor. Roughly 4 minutes after taking off, unable to see properly, the plane clipped some nearby treetops, crashing moments later.
Oh.
Neither the student nor passenger survived. Guess he wasn't as fly as he thought he was. All aboard the pain train. I love a good mystery, don't you? Well, back on the 15th of December 2009, that's exactly what the staff of Germany's U2 subway were faced with. A subway driver was trundling along in his train car when suddenly he spotted the body of a man laying over the tracks. After getting over the shock, confusion set in. How had he gotten here? With the regularity of the trains, there was no way he could have hopped off a platform, run down the tracks, and made it as far as he did. Had he jumped off the back of a moving subway car? And if he had, then why? It didn't make any sense. Because there was no surveillance footage at the location, the police were stumped. But then they discovered that one of the cars on the subway train that had passed over the tracks before the driver discovered the body had a single smashed window. And suddenly it all made sense. This idiot had been alone in the subway car and decided, in all his brilliance, to swing from the handrail and smash one of the windows with his feet. After a couple of attempts, he succeeded, and then was promptly pulled out of the moving train thanks to the suction created by the train moving at speed through the tunnel. Nice. Real smart move there. Well, if ever you needed a really good reason not to damage public property, here it is.
Damn.
Killer pain. There are people out there who will do just about anything to get their hands on a couple of, potent pills, if you know what I mean. And I mean anything. Case in point, back in 2009, a Minnesota man figured that he could get his hands on some narcotic pain medication for free if he staged an accident and went to the hospital. Safe to say this guy wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. Nevertheless, he figured if he jumped out of a moving car, the injuries he sustained would ensure the doctors would have to give him the pain meds he craved. So our mastermind revved up his car, started driving, and then jumped out of the moving vehicle.
Word?
There was just one hitch in his plan. It's hard to ask for pain meds when you're dead. Yep, the injuries he sustained from this stupid plot were so severe, he perished at the scene. Well, I haven't got any pain meds on me, but I do have the next best thing. Here you go, my guy. You can have this Darwin Award instead.
Well, at least he didn't need the pain meds anymore.
Fireworks.
That's good.
Lunar New Year's in Kuala Lumpur is really something to behold. The fireworks set against the glittering lights of the city make for a magical night. The thing is, most types of fireworks are actually banned in Malaysia because of the flammable substances they contain. This means most fireworks displays are done illegally, and a lot of the locals don't know how they work, or how to use the industrial scale ones they can illicitly get their hands on. It was for exactly this reason that our next Darwin Award winner joined our ever-growing list. On 2005's Lunar New Year, a man was watching people set off industrial-scale fireworks that shot more than 150 feet into the air outside a club in suburban Kuala Lumpur.
He said, "Shaq."
Curious, the man decided to get a better look at these powerful fireworks and bent face first over one of the launching tubes they were shooting out of. He was peering down the tube when one came screeching out into his face, sending him flying 30 feet backwards and giving him a few fatal head injuries.
Mother,
Now that's what you call a celebratory send-off.
what did he think was gonna happen?
Need a lift?
Was he expecting different?
There's nothing wrong with going above and beyond for your job, but sometimes you have to watch just how far you go, as one janitor back in 1999 discovered. He was cleaning his building's elevator one day when he noticed something dripping from the ceiling. So eager to do a good job, he rode the second elevator up the shaft, climbed out a hidden service door, and stepped onto the roof of the first elevator. He began mopping up the puddle when all of a sudden, the elevator jolted. In his rush to get to the leak, he'd forgotten to immobilize the first elevator. Unable to do anything, the first elevator rose to the very top of the shaft, crushing him at the top. I don't envy the next janitor that had to clean up that mess. Saw that coming. Copper theft is a huge problem all over the world. Because of its ability to conduct electricity, it's become an incredibly sought-after building material, especially in the last few years. From January 2020 to May 2021, copper prices in the UK soared by an average of 74%, increasing from around £6,100 to about £10,750 per ton. This hasn't gone unnoticed by thieves, who have taken to stripping construction sites, buildings, even railways of the valuable material however they can. But not all these thieves work with Mission Impossible levels of precision during their raids, as one Scottish man proved back in 2001. The electric trains running across Glasgow collect power from an overhead cable. Any excess electricity is transmitted through a solid copper cable lining the rails, which is then routed to a distribution box. Our man, who appeared to have a good knowledge of these electrical systems, planned to saw this cable up in the time between the trains passing when no electricity was traveling through it. Pretty well thought out, and he might have gotten away with it as well were it not for one small, tiny, insignificant issue. The timetable he'd based his brilliant plan on was out of date. As he was sawing, the train began approaching 10 minutes before he'd expected it to. Thousands of volts of electricity suddenly jolted through his body, charring him to a crisp. Let's hope would-be thieves out there take this as a sign. A pretty shocking one at that. Cop shot. I'd like to think I'm pretty good at breaking down stories and explaining things so that everyone can understand them. This is something that back in 1993, a police officer in Illinois reportedly attempted to do, but it ended the worst way just about anything can. Another officer from their precinct had accidentally discharged their firearm into their stomach, unintentionally ending themselves the week before.
Word?
In trying to explain how that was possible to his fellow officer, our cop in question decided to reenact the scenario. The Darwin Award winner pulled out his gun, aimed it at his stomach, and pulled the trigger. The only issue was that he forgot there was a bullet in the chamber, and he didn't have the safety on. Apparently he didn't survive. Hopefully no one in the precinct thought to reenact this reenactment. Shoot your shot. Florida. Any American worth their salt knows that the citizens of this state are, without a doubt, some of the weirdest in the entire
Where my
country.
sister lives.
From organizing mass Facebook
crazy.
events to shoot down hurricanes, to painting political messages on crabs, their bizarreness knows no bounds. Seriously, if it's a dumb idea, someone in Florida has probably tried it. Which is what brings us to our next entrant. Back in April 2022, 3 bored teenagers decided to cook up some fun by using some body armor and, in true American style, a handgun. It's not clear where they got the gun, but the teenagers took turns wearing the body armor and shooting each other, recording the whole thing and uploading it to Snapchat.
What?
I think we can all see where this is going. Yep, one of them donned the armor and laid himself out like a human target, but the other teen's aim was ever so slightly off, hitting him fatally in a part of his chest that wasn't covered by the vest. Panicked, the 2 remaining teenagers called an ambulance and reported the shooting. But then, in an even dumber move, they tried to delete the videos from their Snapchat and lied about what had happened. It didn't take long for an IT specialist to find the video, which made the entire situation look even worse than it already was. Hey kids, top tip here. If you're bored, go play a video game. Don't shoot your friends for Snapchat clout and then dig your own grave by lying about it. Considering these 2 are being tried as adults and could end up spending the rest of their lives behind bars, I'm going to give them 2 honorary Darwin Awards also. Nice one, boys. Doing Florida proud. MacBook mistake.
Definitely doing Florida proud.
While I dragged those previous trigger-happy morons over the coals for their dumb gun safety behavior, their stupidity is nothing compared to another bullet-related Darwin Award. Back in March 2022, a Russian soldier in an active Ukrainian war zone came across an abandoned MacBook. Now, he wanted the MacBook, but he didn't have anywhere on his person to store it. No problem, he thought. I'll just remove the ballistic breastplate of my body armor and put the MacBook in there. Now, for those who don't know, MacBooks can't stop bullets. You know what can? A specially designed ballistic breastplate. But hey, it wasn't like he was going to get shot in, the active war zone he was in the middle of. Safe to say this stupid soldier didn't make it out of Ukraine alive. When Ukrainian soldiers eventually retrieved his body, they not only found the MacBook, but they also apparently found a stolen iPad as well. From the moronic logic this guy was employing, I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to use the tablet as a helmet. Fire ants. When police arrived at the scene in Rome, New York back in 2001, they struggled to understand what they were seeing. A woman's body was on fire in the grassy area adjacent to her home, and while there was a lighter and melted gas can discovered nearby, there was no immediate sign of foul play.
Did she get attacked by a group of angry fire ants and then light herself on fire in order to get them up off of her? More than 11, but please let that be what happened.
Despite investigating the incident for months, the police turned up nothing and eventually came to the only logical explanation available. This woman had been smoking a cigarette and, according to her neighbors, indulging in her habit of dousing anthills in her yard with gasoline. While she was holding the gas can, an ember from the cigarette fell into the gasoline stream, which quickly ignited and traveled up the stream, bursting the can and immolating the woman in an instant. Guess that makes it Ants 1, Karen 0.
Damn.
Superhuman stupidity. How strong do you think you are? Are you down at the gym every day pumping iron? Or does your body look like it's been made out of toothpicks? Whatever it is, I think we can all agree there are very few people on Earth that possess the raw strength needed to stop a car in its tracks. With an average car weighing in at a little over 4,000 pounds, you'd need superhuman strength to go toe-to-toe with any metal beast. But that thought didn't come across one man's mind back in 2001. Apparently, having parked his car at the edge of a reservoir in Fresno, California, he got out only to watch as his car slowly rolled forward towards the water's edge. Now, the logical thing here would be to jump into the car and put it in park, right? Well, this guy had another idea. He leapt in front of the car as it rolled forwards, assuming he'd be strong enough to act as some sort of immovable object. But he thought a bit too much of himself and the car just rolled over him, pinning him beneath the water, and he didn't survive. But his story does serve as a reminder that man cannot win a fight against a moving car, no matter how strong he thinks he is. Jet-fueled idiocy. We've all taken a wrong turn at some point in our lives, but when there are multiple stop signs, warning signals, and traffic lights, quickly turning back is the logical answer. Though it wasn't for a taxi driver in Rio de Janeiro back in the year 2002. Having dropped off a fare at the Santos Dumont Airport, the taxi driver decided to follow the road around, assuming it'd lead away from the airport at some point. But soon he was confronted by sign after sign telling him he was actually approaching the runway. Flashing lights warned him a plane was on the runway and ready to take off, but apparently ignoring this, the taxi drove straight on. Despite the completely unobscured 737 passenger jet on the runway about to take off, he continued his journey behind it when both the plane's engines revved up. At their peak, each 737 jet engine can produce a huge 50,000 pounds of thrust. And as you probably figured out, a single taxi is no match for all that force. The engines blew the taxi away, flipping it more than 80 feet into the nearby sea. It was a brief journey that the driver didn't survive. I guess the moral of this story is, don't drive right behind a jet plane that's about to take off? Is that not already a given?
It's pretty much a given.
Falling for you. Usually when you see reams of safety tape blocking off an area, it's a pretty clear sign that you should avoid that area, right? Doesn't matter what's happening inside, it's been blocked off for an important reason. Well, despite this being a pretty universal understanding, back in 2004, there was a man in South Africa who decided to ignore this entirely. Emphasis on the was. He was sitting in a cafe watching a team of lumberjacks across the way with loud chainsaws cutting down some large, heavy-looking trees. They'd cordoned off the area with tape, ensuring no one would be accidentally smushed by the falling timber. Despite this, our man suddenly made a beeline for the area, ducking under the tape to use the pavement to meet his girlfriend in a nearby shop. And at that exact moment, a huge tree the lumberjacks had quite clearly been working on came crashing down. Despite their frantic shouts, the guy ignored them and kept walking forward and was, and obviously, crushed by the tree. Crushed on the way to meet his crush. If it weren't so stupid, it'd almost be poetic.
Beautiful weekend. Love it.
All natural causes. I'm terrible at taking racy pictures. I never know what pose to strike or what lingerie to wear. Jokes aside, there was one man in Germany who definitely didn't have these issues. Not only was this guy happy to take photos of himself completely nude, but he also took these photos out in public, and we know this for the same reason he ended up with a Darwin Award. Back in September 2000, our man was in his birthday suit in the medieval city of Rothenburg, taking photos of himself on top of a high stone wall.
Word?
He set up his camera on a tripod, hopped up on the wall, and started pulling a few poses when suddenly he lost his balance and fell 16 feet onto the ground below. The police apparently had to develop the film of the camera to piece this case together, and I bet they were hoping he'd accidentally left the lens cap on. A buttload of sherry. Alcoholism is a terrible disease, with an estimated 107 million people all over the world suffering from some form of alcohol use disorder. But back in 2004, a man from Texas found a unique way to take his disorder to a whole other level. He had a throat ailment, which meant that swallowing anything acidic was quite a painful process. So he opted to take his liquor, rectally. Yep. This guy would give himself alcohol enemas. An enema is where you inject liquid into the rectum to stimulate the cleaning of the bowel. However, these liquids can also be taken into the body by way of the bloodstream, which is how our man opted to consume his spirits. One night he was planning to have one hell of a party by buying 2 1.5-liter bottles of sherry and hooking them up for a, butt chug?
Mother.
Now usually, when we've had enough to drink, we just stop drinking, or we pass out. Well, our guy had definitely had enough and passed out mid-alcohol enema. However, there was still a lot of sherry all up in his junk, which continued to be absorbed into his bloodstream long after he fell unconscious. By the next morning, he'd basically embalmed himself. Now, it's legal to drive if your blood alcohol content is below 0.08%. That's roughly 1 drink. At about 6 to 10 standard drinks in, your blood alcohol level is around 0.20%. And you generally need assistance walking. Vomiting and blacking out is also on the cards. Alcohol poisoning and a loss of consciousness sets in when your blood alcohol content is at around 0.25%, which is like consuming 20 to 30 standard drinks. At 0.40%, your body begins to shut down irreversibly. And our Darwin Award winner's blood alcohol content was a staggering 0.47%. Wow, this guy must have had bowels of steel.
The moral of this video is, you only live once, so you gotta try everything at least twice. Doesn't work when it involves drinking things up the back of you. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe. Twism.